my name's Andy Dahl, shop foreman here at Calmer Cornheads. Today we have a John Deere 90 series cornhead. In this video we are going to show you how to properly disassemble and then reassemble and spec components, all with the Calmer residue management kit. Hopefully this video will speed things up on your farm, answer any questions, and just be an overall enjoyable experience installing the kit. So before we get started installing our Calmer residue management kit, here's a whole list of tools that we found useful and things that you're going to need to make the process a little bit easier. So start off with 1 1/8 or 1 1/4 wrench, depending on which drive system you have. Some of the 12 rows take 1 1/4 wrench to turn over the cornhead. A pair of 15/16 wrenches, 18mm wrench, 15/16 socket, 18mm socket, 3/4 inch socket, air hammer with a 1/2 inch punch, some kind of a cordless or air impact wrench, 1/2 inch drive ratchet, 3/8 drive ratchet, drift punch, dead blow hammer, regular steel hammer, jar never sees, snap ring pliers, the hex bit, which should be included in your kit. We're going to need a torque wrench that'll go to at least 85 foot-pounds, putty knife or scraper, some kind of marking device when we're torquing the stalk roll bolts, and a couple of 1/2 inch bolts to align up our pinion shafts. Also in your kit will be a set of cut resistant gloves. With all that, should make your process go a lot easier. First off, you can see we have most of the hoods off of this head. I'm going to show you how to remove one last hood. It's not imperative that you remove all the hoods, but it's a lot easier. It gets them out of your way. It's just one less thing to fight as we're going through the disassembly process. We'll start with tearing the hood off. On the 90 series hood, it's fairly simple. 13mm socket takes this little bolt loose right here. There's a little L-shaped latch, so all we have to do is loosen this out of our way, just like that. Get the L shape out of our way, the lock. I like to tighten it back up to keep it out of the way. Next, it's a lot easier if you have a partner to help you, but all you have to do is kick it up and slide it off the hood hinge pins and carry it out of the way. So now you can see we have all the hoods off of the head. Not a bad idea. Take the air wand, blow any excess chaff, dirt, debris off the top of the head. Just good clean slate. We're ready to start disassembly and getting things stripped off. All right, once we have the top deck all cleaned off, first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the gathering chain. So to do that, 15/16 wrenches, 2 nuts down here on the idler block. First thing we're going to do is loosen the jam nut and back that off. Once that's backed off, usually you can just pull on the gathering chain, and that brings the idler strap back, and wheel that jam nut back as far as you can, like that. Then let go of the chain. Now we got slop in the chain. If we need a little more slop, it's no big deal. We just hold the top of the bolt and wheel that jam nut even farther back. What we're doing is we're pulling that idler strap back into the idler itself, or into the idler spring itself. So once we have slack in the chain, we will use 15/16 socket. We'll take this nut off on the idler. Take it all the way off. Take the grease zerk off too. Now we can take our idler, spread the chain, slide it up, out we go. This should give us enough slop now. We can remove the gathering chain from the drive sprocket and remove the whole gathering chain. We'll have to do the same thing to the other side. We have to loosen the jam nut. Wheel the jam nut back, pull the chain tension out. That gives us slack in the chain. Now we use our 15/16 socket again to take the nut off the idler. Nut and the grease washer come off. Gives us enough slack in the chain. We can remove our idler. Now we take the gathering chain off the gathering shaft drive sprocket. Once we have the gathering chains off, now we're ready to take off our idler assembly and our chain guides. Switchback 18 millimeter, we'll take those out. Once those are out, off we go. Next, the chain guide. Now we're able to take the deck plate off. The other side off. Now once the stripper plates are off, we need to remove the 8-tooth drive sprockets. Use snap ring pliers. There's a ring on each one. Just need to remove the snap ring. A lot of times these will be tight. Just need to take a pry bar. You can pick up on them. You know, you pry them off. There are times when a 2 or 3 jaw gear puller will be needed to pull these off. These happen to come right off, but don't be afraid if they're stuck. Spray them down with some penetrant, and then use a 3 jaw puller. It's not a problem. All right, so now that deck plates are removed, chains and guides and sprockets are all removed, it's a good time to clean off the row units. We'll scrape those down, get them cleaned up. We also want to check the gathering chain drive shafts. We'll want to check the bushings to make sure they're still tight, and then we'll want to check the seal on the top. A good way when we're inspecting the seal is like this one right here needs to be replaced. You can see there's debris here, and it's wet with grease. You can see it's wet. That means that seal is leaking. There's a spring on that shaft that augers grease up the shaft to the bushing to keep it lubricated. The seal's supposed to hold the grease in, obviously, and you can see it is leaking. So to clean the top of the row frame, I'm using a straight blade or like a putty knife to scrape off the debris that's on there. If a guy wants to use a wire brush on a 4.5 inch grinder, that's not a problem. But for simplicity, we're just using a putty knife today just to get some of the scale off. So after we have checked that the bushings are good in the gearbox and checked all of our seals on the top and repaired anything that is leaking, the top end should be good to go. It's time to go underneath, remove weed knives and stalk rolls, and start that disassembly process. So now we are on the bottom side of the corn head. Want to take precautions to block the header. Here in the shop, we don't have it on a combine, we have it on a big forklift. We've got stands underneath it, so if something should happen, it would catch the corn head. At home, you guys are probably going to have it on your combine. Make sure all your cylinder stops are in. Take all your, the head is latched onto the feeder house, cylinder stops in. Take all safety precautions so nobody gets hurt. What we're going to do now is 18 millimeter socket. We're going to take all the bolts out of the grass knives, one on each side of the row unit. So we'll just remove those. Oh yeah. Now the other side of the weed knives. Okay, now that we have the grass knives all removed, next thing we want to do, these are cast John Deere rolls, so they have two clamp bolts that come in here, another set of two that are over on the other rolls. They take a 3/4 socket, and we'll go and back those out. Okay, so now that the grass knives are all removed, we need to move the clamp bolts off of the cast rolls. So 18 millimeter socket. There'll be 2 per roll. Okay, now that the clamp bolts have been removed, we're back on top of the corn head. There'll be a pair of roll pins in the very front part of the stalk roll. What I like to use is an air hammer with a 1/2 inch roll pin punch on the end. You can use a punch and hammer, but this is really effective. Doesn't take too long. So locate the pins, drive them out. The other roll pins will be 90 degrees to the other roll. Rotate that around. Locate those 2 roll pins, drive those out. So once we have all the attaching hardware out of the cast stalk roll, what we need to do next is blow this out with air. There's going to be debris inside the nose cone because next we're going to have to bring a puller in here and pull the rolls off the pinion shaft. So next up, we'll clean out any dust and debris, and once we're done blowing the dust out, we'll want to get some penetrating fluid and spray as much as we can on the shaft to loosen that up to help aid sliding that off. When driving the roll pins out, if you don't have an air hammer with the 1/2 inch roll pin punch, you certainly can use a hammer and a regular roll pin punch to drive that out. The air hammer makes things a lot easier, a lot quicker. The roll pin that we're driving out can go either way. You don't have to drive them one direction or the other. Whichever is easiest for you to get a punch and a hammer on them, you can drive them out. So to clean the nose cone spiral area out of the stalk roll, just use compressed air. We're going to blow any debris that's in the center of that nose cone out, just so we can get the shaft of our puller in there. Okay, now that we've got that clean, we're ready to grab the puller and pull them off. So now all the attaching hardware is out of the stalk rolls. We've blown out the nose cone area. We're ready to put our 2-jaw puller in to pull the stalk roll off. At the shop here, we have a hydraulic puller. If you don't have one of those, obviously you can use any 2-jaw puller that's long reach that can get you down into the slots here to, behind the spiral, to pull the stalk roll off. So it takes 2 of us to run our puller. It's just a big puller. So I got Lucas going to help me hook it up. So once the jaws are in place, we want to be straight on it. Now, when they don't come loose, we'll have to go get the torch, and where we're going to heat up is where the roll pin area was. That's where it is stuck on there. It's not stuck on the clamp portion. It is stuck where the roll pins have gone through the pinion shaft. So we'll go get the torch, heat that up, and show you how to pull that off. So now that we've got our puller on the roll and the roll is seized onto the shaft, we went and got our torch. I'm going to show you where we're going to heat on the stalk roll itself. Once we expand the stalk roll with the heat, the puller should pull it clean off of there. So with that, we'll get to it. And heat right where the roll pins go through. A little bit of heat, there it comes off. Now that the stalk rolls have been removed, we need to clean the pinion shafts up. A good way to do that is just compressed air again. We're going to blow the shafts off a little bit. We will want to check these pinion seals. We'll take a look at those. Same thing as the top drive sprockets shafts. If they're wet, you know that they're leaking. There'll be grease coming out of them. These seals appear to be great, so we're going to leave those alone, but we'll just use air and blow these out. Also, now that we have the bare pinion shafts, what we want to do is you can either take emery paper, or this is Scotch-Brite. We want these surfaces to be fairly clean, so when the new stalk rolls go on, they've got a good place to clamp to hold tight. So like I say, Scotch-Brite or even sand cloth. Okay, now we're ready to reassemble with all of our Calmer parts. Now that everything is disassembled, we're ready to go back together. One quick thing we want to check is that our pinion timing is correct. So you see I've just grabbed regular old 1/2-inch bolts right out of the bolt bin. We want to make sure that when one is horizontal, the other one is perfectly vertical. We want this to be 90 degrees to each other. Close won't get you. We have to be 90 degrees. If we are not, it's in our book. You have to remove this pinion housing, and basically you'll think it's one tooth off, but it's actually 180 degrees out. Any shaft, it doesn't matter which one. It's in our book though. This one looks to be spot on 90 degrees. So I will remove the 1/2-inch alignment bolts. We need to never seize our pinion shafts. When we never seize the pinion shafts, we are only never seizing the front, 2-3 inches where the roll pin holes are. Not on the back, that's where the clamp is. We want that to be a dry surface so we can clamp tight to the shaft. So real quick, we'll put some anti-seize here. And all we're doing with the anti-seize is for removal next time. It should make it much easier to remove. With that on, you'll want to use your cut resistant gloves. They should be included in your packaging. So find those, please wear those. The Stalk rolls are very sharp. They will cut right through a leather glove. So that's why we send these special gloves with us. So we'll put those on. Next, when we go to our Stalk rolls, remember they're labeled right and left. That's always from the cab, from the seat. So that's why from your guys' view, it's backwards, but always from the cab, right, left. So it doesn't really matter which one we start on. I'll start with the left just because it's closest. What we want to do is line up the roll pin holes there with the roll pin holes on my pinion shaft. Slides on pretty easy. And in the hardware packs, we've got 1/2-inch roll pins to go back in. And what I like to do is go ahead and get one started. Be careful with the hammer that you don't go too deep. The blades are hard. If you hit them with the hammer, they will chip out. So I like to just get them started. And I get the second one in, started. You can go all the way in with a hammer and a roll pin punch. I like to go back to my air hammer again. We're going to drive them in just flush. So roll pins are in flush. And we need to come in and rotate our shafts around a little bit more. We'll grab our right-handed roll. Line up our roll pin holes. As long as we have our roll pin holes lined up on the shaft, we're in time. Once in a while they get stuck, just grab your hammer, typically a block of wood, and we'll drive that on. It'll get past, then we'll put our roll pins in. So if they're a little tough going on, always grab a block of wood. I got the block of wood and the hammer. Never want to strike right on the actual Stalk roll. That will mushroom the end out. It's just not a good idea. So block of wood. There she went on. They typically should go on fairly easy. They should not take a ton of force. We'll get that on. Sometimes also to align things up, I'll just take a drift punch, put that in there. It also holds it, it won't let it out. We'll go back, start our roll pin again. Remember not to drive too deep with just your hammer, as if you hit the blades, they will chip. So put our second one in. Okay. We will grab our air hammer, drive them flush. Now that our roll pins are in, we want to check in the front real quick. We want to make sure that our blades are fairly centered in between each other. Just to double check that our pinions are in time again. It looks like these are dead on. We're in good shape. Next, we need to move on to putting in the Allen head bolts. So when we put the Allen head bolts in, There'll be one from one direction, one from another direction. They get a little bit of a medium strength Loctite. That will be in your hardware pack as well. There's probably more than enough Loctite in each hardware pack for the bolts you need to do. But when you shake that up, put that on. Very important, we want to start both bolts. We want to get them both in, not torqued, but both started. If we put one in, torque it, there's a chance we will spring the clamp a little bit. We won't be able to get the second one started. They take the 3/8 Allen head, comes with your, should come with your instructions. Want to get them started. We want to make sure that we're always doing this with hand tools. We never want to use an impact wrench on these. If you cross thread them with an impact, you basically ruin the stalk roll. So it can be a costly error. So we always run them in by hand. If anything gets tight, we stop right away, back it out, clean it up with a tap. But you can see I'm going to run this in by hand, just so he's snug, nothing tight. Need to rotate it around. There's the other one on top. Start by hand again. And snug. Now we'll go ahead and do that to the other side also. I got one last one to go in. So now that the Allen heads are all in there hand tight, now we need to grab our torque wrench. 85 foot-pounds on those guys. So we'll grab our torque wrench and we'll torque everything to 85 foot-pounds. Once our Calmer stalk rolls are properly installed on the pinion shafts, next we're going to install the Calmer grass knife. First thing we notice is we only utilize 2 bolt holes instead of 4 as the factory. We're just worried about protecting this spiral and the first couple inches of the stalk roll. The rest of the stalk roll is basically a self-cleaning stalk roll. It does not wrap, so we're going to install the Calmer grass knife. You'll notice that it's L-shaped. The L is going to go protrude up towards the top of the row unit from the bottom. Utilize the existing bolts we already took out. And what we're looking for when we install this, if we're too tight, we'll protrude it over the center line of the row unit. So we want to be back just a little bit, and we want to have at least a 1/4 inch gap between the longest blade and the grass knife. So with the Calmer grass knife in place, we have some adjustment. We want to make sure that the edge of the grass knife is not protrude into the center of the row past the barrel of the stalk roll spiral. We don't want this to be our pinch point. So we slide it away. We got, just so we're covering most of the tip. Back here on the longest knife of our stalk roll, we need a minimum 1/4 inch gap on that. We're good here, so we hold that into place. Take our impact. Double check that we're not protruding through. We're great there. We've got at least a 1/4 inch gap over here, so we're good to go. We'll install the other side now. Once we've installed the grass knives, we want to come around the front side, maybe to the top. We want to make sure nothing's hitting the stalk roll at any place. Looks like we're in good shape. So those are now properly installed. Next, we'll move on to the top portion of the row frame. We'll install our deck plates. So after our grass knives are properly installed, everything is installed great underneath the bottom of the corn head. We'll move to the top side and get going on the stripper plates. All right, now that the stalk rolls are all installed, we're on the top side of the row frame. Before we put our deck plates on, we need to install our anti-hairball insert. What that is a little bent rod that's going to go up at the top of the stripping tunnel right here. You will have to weld that in. What that does is that just shuts the gap down between the deck plate and the top plate of the gearbox. Just keeps any stock material from wanting to walk around the back side of that, ultimately plugging the top of the row unit up. So I have Lucas come in and weld that in. The main thing we need to realize is we can't be too low with this. If we're too low, our stalk rolls will hit it. If we're too high, then our gathering chains will hit it, or excessive trash will build up. So we've got the longest blades with the hard surface welds at the top here. We lay that down on top of those and then pick it up and put it right in the center of the old hard face weld there. We'll hold there, right in the center of the row. We're going to tack on each end, and then we'll bring a bead across. You'll see there's wear here from years of use. We're going to fill that in with the weld. So I'm going to let Lucas come in here, tack that in, weld it shut, and show you finished product. Now that our anti-hairball insert is welded in, we're ready to put on our deck plates. This is a manual adjust head, so there's no hydraulic side on this. So both plates look identical except for the bevel goes down. So pretty simple. We'll lay them back here. Using our chain guides again, same bolts. We're not going to tighten anything down because we do have to set our adjustment, our gap. So we just get them hand tight. We do want this plate to be able to move. So now that those are set somewhat in place, what we need to do is we need to set the gap, stripper plate gap. Very important, we want this gap centered over the row. So there's a couple ways we can go about finding the center of the row. First off, the fill plug or the check plug at the top of the gearbox, that is the center of the row unit. So basically there's an imaginary line that extends from that check plug all the way down. A couple other things we can line up with. The width of the cutout on the top plate is typically about the width of your stripper plate gap, so we can kind of line the edges up to double check us that we're you know, even on that cutout of the top plate. Another thing we can do is we can come in from the top and we can look down through the barrels of our stalk rolls when the windows are open. The barrel should show just a little bit through the width of our stripper plate gap. So that's a couple of things to help us get centered. We don't want the one plate all the way open or all the way closed. We should be somewhere in the middle of our adjusting range here. So a couple things you know, that you can use to help set your gap. You can measure out some sockets. And measure, you know, get the right measurement on your socket. You can use those as feeler gauges, or here at the shop we do a lot of these, so we make up our own little jig. So 1 1/8 inch, 3/16. You always want to be a little tighter out in the front than at the rear. That way we don't plug anything towards the back. We want to center it up tight and then open up to release any material in the back. So that'll keep us from plugging. So when setting stripper plates, we've made our own little gauge. We do a lot of stripper plates in the shop here. So we want to make a gauge that's 1 1/8 inch in the front, 1 3/16 in the back. That usually gets us a pretty good spacing for most corn. Always want to be tighter in the front. We want to center up that stalk and release it a little bit in the back so we don't get any plugging. But this gauge works really nice for that. So when we set our deck plates, we're going to put our jig in the center of the row unit. We want to bring our stripper plates in evenly from each side. A couple other things, you can see where we're shifted to the right here. You know, you want to use these as a gauge that we want even, you know, even gaps on all sides. So if you see, we just have a little bit of a V showing there, just a little bit of a V showing there to the edge of our, or the end of our stripper plate. Back here, if we get in front of the row unit, you ought to see we're shifted to the right just a little bit. Well, sometimes you just take the edge of your ratchet, tap it over. Using your hand ratchet, I would go ahead and lightly tighten these down. Make sure we're tight here before we finish up tightening. One last check. So everything's snug by hand. Pull our jigs out, come around the front. Like I said, our double check. You look down between the open window, the barrels. We've got pretty good even coverage there. Another thing, we'll shoot right up here and see that there's the center line of our row. We look centered, the gap is centered, follows on up to there. So this is a manual adjust deck plate system. We get a lot of calls in on hydraulic adjustable deck plate systems. How do you set those? Number one question is do we take the hydraulic plate, move it all the way closed? Do we move it all the way open? Where do we start? Good place to start is somewhere in between. We don't go all the way closed. We're not all the way open. We're somewhere in between. Usually it's in the middle of the swing, but just like this manual deck plate, a good place to start for your hydraulic plate is this hard-faced edge is right in line with the edge of that hole in the cover plate for our check plug. That's a good place to start. Once you get that somewhat set there, this plate will be loose. Put your gauge in, slide it over to it, tighten it. Then we'll want to get out and take a look. Make sure that this gap is truly centered over the row unit. Want to double check through the barrels here. Want to double check out front that we're about the same width to the row frame there, and that both edges of our stripper plate basically line up with the cutout of the top plate. If not, we need to adjust this hydraulic plate in or out just a little bit with just a quick push of the button in the cab. Once we get that set, and we get one row set, we shut the combine off. We don't touch the hydraulics again. Every plate across the corn head on the left-hand side should be stuck here and stay here. We can drop our blocks in, come over with our manual adjust on the right-hand side, tighten it down. Every row should be uniform then. We're doing this on a manual adjust John Deere corn head, but the same principles apply, whether it's hydraulic adjust, manual adjust, across all brands. At the end of the day, we want to have, our 1.1/8" gap over the center of the row, lined up there with some sort of reference point on the top plate. It may not be this plug, different brands, it may be something different, but you can always double check yourself through the open window of the stalk roll barrels and see that we are centered over the row. Next, we need to disassemble the idler block system. In your kit, you'll have an extra 5/8 washer. We have one 5/8 washer at the back of the bolt on your tensioner bolt. We like to remove all this, inspect the bolt, and then put the extra washer in between the spring and the idler strap. What that does is it keeps that idler spring from augering itself into the idler strap and ultimately causing that idler to lock up and throw a chain. So that's why that's included in the kit. What we need to do is disassemble this, which means we need to back off the tensioner nut off the tensioner bolt, tear the spring apart, tear the idler strap apart, put this washer back in, reassemble. We'll pull that out. It's usually got dust and dirt and debris. Also, while you have this apart, we need to check that that spring is intact. A lot of times you won't know it, but it can be broken in there. At that time, we need to replace that spring with a new one. This one looks good. Inspect your bolt, make sure threads are good. As these get old and wore, they'll really start to cut into that bolt. This one looks like it's acceptable. We're going to put it back together. Here's our extra washer. Now, this can be tricky as this is spring loaded now, but if you push down and twist, and if you hurry, get your jam nut started, there you go. What you'll want to do now is put your wrench on the jam nut, impact on the bolt. We're going to tighten this down so that there's almost no space for that pipe spacer to move. So we're going to clamp the spring down almost as tight as we can. Just like that. Take our idler block, make sure it goes back on the same direction. I'll slide that through. Start the tensioning nut. Hold it with your wrench. What we're looking to do is just get full threads in the nut. This will help us when we put our 9-tooth idler back on, that we've got this idler strap back far enough. Now this is ready to be put back on the corn head. Once we're full threads there, I'm going to take our existing plow bolt on. If you have one of the Case or the New Hollands, you'll have a little shim washer right here. You'll have a divot right there. That's where that goes. We need to put that back on at this time. The Deere we do not. We just need to put it up through the square hole. Case New Holland, need 2 of the stainless steel shim washers. That's included in your packaging. John Deere only needs 1 stainless shim on the bottom, or washer. Put that down. On the 9-tooth idler, there is a top and a bottom. The top has 3 distinct planes on it. The bottom has 1 distinct plane. So Deere and the case, we're going to put them on the same way. I'm going to put the top, the three planes facing up. Put that on our plow bolt. Both Deere and Case and New Holland, 1 stainless steel washer on the top. And go back with our existing nut. There's no need to tighten that up, as we're going to put it on the corn head and probably have to remove it to drape our new gathering chain in there. So once that's complete, this idler's ready to go back on the corn head, and we're ready to install gathering chains once it's on. So next, we're going to install our 6-tooth drive sprockets. We've already checked our top bushings, we checked our seals, replaced anything that needs doing. Simple, we just slide those on. There is a top and a bottom, obviously. The bottom has the skirting on it, the top is more domed. So when we install our slow down gathering chain sprockets, the John Deere's are going to be a hex spline with a snap ring on top to hold those on. The Case New Holland models are going to be a spline shaft, and there'll be a bolt that goes through the top of the gathering shaft. You'll tighten those down. John Deere's, we put the snap ring on. That's what holds those in place. Okay, so after we get our slow down sprockets installed, we're ready to put on our idler blocks. Make sure when we put our idler blocks on that our plow bolt is in and seated up into the idler strap with the 9-tooth on it. Gonna drop it on. Finger tight, make sure the bolts start. Grab the other side, same thing, and make sure our plow bolt's up in there. No real adjustment to these, we just tighten them up snug. Once our idler blocks are in place, we'll begin putting on our gathering chains. We put on our gathering chains, we want to make sure that the lug is the rounded portion of the lug is leading. This would be a backwards chain. This would be the correct way to install. We'll drape it over our slow down sprocket at the top. Come around the front, take our 9-tooth loose. Pick up the 9-tooth like this. Make sure we grab all our washers and caps. Slide the chain over the teeth, back down on the plow bolt. We want to make sure that plow bolt's up and seated. It's very important that plow bolt is seated, or it will lock up the idler. Now I want to come to the other side. For all corn heads, doesn't matter what model, we like our chain lugs to intermesh just like this. The only time that we want these to be lug to lug like this is in down corn adverse conditions, but if we're going to the field to pick regular corn every day of the week, we're going to be staggered. Same thing, we're going to lift off the stainless washers and caps of our 9-tooth idler up over the bolt. Put the teeth of the sprocket in, make sure all of our washers and caps get back on. Make sure our plow bolt is centered back in the idler strap. Take our nut, Tighten it back up. We use our impact and tighten those up. So once the chain is on, idler bolt is tight, now we need to tension our chain. What we'll do is we'll hold the head of the bolt here and we'll run the tensioner nut down until we take pressure off the spring. Now you can see we took pressure off the spring, off the jam nut. He's loose. We'll come down. We're just a hair tight. Proper setting for tension is about the coil width of a spring, or about 3/16 of an inch. Looks like we're just a hair tight. So we'll back that off just a little bit. About 3/16 of an inch. Run our jam nut down. We're gonna jam nut tight to the casting. That's what locks the system. Basically, there should be a little bit of bounce in your chain. And that chain's properly tensioned. We'll have to do the same for the other side. Now that one's properly tensioned also. Once we've done that, we've completed the install of the Calmer residue management kit. We will want to run this by hand with a wrench, spin the whole head over, make sure nothing binds, nothing clicks, makes noise that it shouldn't do. And if that's all clear, we'll hook it to the combine. We'll fire it up at idle, do the same thing, listen, make sure nothing sounds odd or hitting, and then run it at full speed and make sure we're in good shape. So once we've properly tensioned the chains, you've now successfully installed Calmer's gathering chain slowdown kit. I would recommend that we go to the back of the head with a wrench, turn the whole head over by hand, make sure everything runs smoothly, nothing hits, nothing clicks, binds. If that's good, I would hook it to the combine. We would start the machine at idle, let it run at idle for just a few minutes, make sure everything runs smoothly, run it up to full speed. If everything runs smoothly, you're done. You're ready to go to the field.